All right, guys, welcome back. C3 Garage Media. Appreciate you guys following along for another awesome episode. Unfortunately, today's episode is not so awesome. I would rather be doing a cool upgrade, getting out, doing some driving. But since we're all quarantined to our house, I started tinkering around with the car. And yesterday, noticed something quite concerning. Let me show you guys.
Yesterday I actually jacked the car up because I was hearing a noise that sounded like a loose exhaust rattle actually coming from underneath the car. I'll show you that. So I jacked the car up, get underneath, found out where my loose rattle's coming from, which I'll show you guys in another episode. But I noticed my intake tube looked like it was kind of drooping down a little bit. Normally it's kind of... So I grabbed it and just kind of wiggled it and noticed something quite disconcerting. Actually, if you look, there are no bolts holding the cold side of my turbo on. In fact, if you look down here, you can see I got one bolt loosely in place and nothing up here. So I'm thinking possibly when I had this elbow welded on to the cold side of the turbo, maybe when I was clutch kicking and whatnot, it was hitting the side of the engine bay in here. Or maybe it just, they naturally came loose. But either way, cold side of the turbo came loose, which has caused some pretty catastrophic turbo failure. Now, the last time I drove this, when I kind of had my sneaking suspicion that something might be going on, car would only make about 6 pounds of boost, and this completely explains it. Let's pray to God my intercooler stopped all this turbo debris. As you can see, this impeller blade is just pretty well thrashed. Predominantly these outside vanes. The inside vanes actually don't look too terrible. But on a fortunate note, I happen to have a backup turbo. So, in today's video,
We are going to pull this turbo. Gonna check the intercooler, see how much material is in there. Get the new turbo put on, which I happen to have. Just right over there on the shelf. And we'll see if we can't minimize this madness. So follow along, guys. C3 Garage Media.
alright, so I've had lots of questions about how I mount my turbo. Just anyone that has the CX Racing kit will know that this turbo is pretty decent sized and the access down here is terrible. So, want to show you what my solution was. Number one, you can see I have all my brake lines pretty well heat taped. For this front stud, so furthest to the front of the car, passenger side, this back one, and for the one underneath this coolant passage, you'll notice you have to take the coolant line out to get to it. I've gone with Allen studs. So with those, or Allen bolts, with those, I can utilize a tapered Allen wrench to get in there pretty easily. Now for the back, I have to be a little bit more creative. So for this back stud, which is underneath the housing, it's pretty challenging to get to because it's down here out of sight. I actually just put a 17 mil wrench on a crow's foot, so I'll show you that. Alright guys, so this is what I use to loosen the bolts on the back side of the turbo over here. So I actually have a nice long extension on a crow's foot, and I reach around and I utilize this to break the nut off on the back side of the turbo. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Well, let's take a closer look at what went on here. So, as we can see, the outer wheels of my turbine housing are just pretty well destroyed. That impeller's obviously hit the sides of the housing and chipped off and caused some debris to do some pitting in here. What it appears, because these aren't completely stripped out, it appears that these nuts just wiggled loose. Or maybe they weren't tightened down in the first place. And basically, this one bolt in the back here kind of wedged itself sideways as the housing started to move, and that's the only thing that kept this entire housing from coming off as well. This bolt here in the front stayed in, and this strap was kind of, or this tab was kind of bent over like so. So that was the only thing that kept it from fully destroying itself. It's probably also what helped it kind of get so bad. But on a plus side, I happen to have an exact turbo just like this sitting over there. I'd purchased an additional one from CX Racing when I got this, just not thinking it would last as long as it did, and boy am I glad I have that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get to work. I'm going to use a flexible elbow in this spot again, just because I think that flex is really what, or that lack of flexing is really what caused this to maybe vibrate loose. So I do actually have another 90-degree elbow. I should have. We'll go ahead and we'll use this one instead. Alright, well, let's go ahead and start tearing down this turbo. Get the oil line fitting off. Get the coolant line off. Go ahead and get my custom oil drain line off, which actually is kind of nice to be able to take a look at it. And then we'll go ahead and start getting everything back on. As you can see, the old turbo is just wasted. This wheel definitely got, I'd say, a good 1/4 inch trimmed off of it. I found very few bits of metal in the intercooler, and the ones I did find were extremely small. So I'm just praying that the motor's okay at this point. It sounds perfect. I changed the oil and filter and actually flushed some oil through it. Everything looked good. I have a magnetic tip on my drain plug and had no metal on it, or very, very, very little metal, just what you would normally expect, a few shavings. But yeah, this turbo, man, it got eaten up pretty good. So, good turbo, bad turbo, good turbo, bad turbo.
My old coupler actually wore through. This was coming, let me show you, right here, my wheel well going up, and at full lock was actually just getting the slightest little touch, and it almost wore through. I mean, that is paper thin right there. So we got our new 45-degree coupler. Go ahead and put this back together, and hopefully this whole turbo broken mess will be behind us.
Go ahead and plug in our intake air sensor. Just went ahead and hooked up the blow-off valve line. Tightened up all my clamps. I have the new 45-degree fitting in there, and I was able to turn the wheel and verify I now have enough clearance, at least not under load. We'll get it down and see how it looks. Cleared the intercooler of any, I mean, it was just powder dust. So now we'll go ahead and fire it right up. Nice. Motor sounds good. I did change the oil and filter just to make sure. I'll let it get up to heat, just make sure we don't have any leaks anywhere. As of right now, looks good.
until it was hot through a full heat cycle. Pray to God the motor's okay. So I'm just really hopeful that I have no engine damage, although I fear something had to have happened with as much metal as came off that turbo. I did find quite a bit of it in the actual intake itself, so I'm wondering if it kind of bounced forward, got shot off the turbo. At least that's what I'm hoping. So here she is. Again, the motor sounds great, revs great, idles fine. We'll find out how it builds boost. I'm going to get it off the jacks, get it put back together, get the front end back on it, and we'll take it out. Well, guys, it feels great to drive. It's driving super solid, other than my slightly bent rim. I can feel that. Runs great. I'm about to get on some boost once I pull out on the road here. Just make sure the engine's making good power and hitting the PSI it used to with good air fuel, and I think we'll be gravy. So hang tight. Back from our ride. For some reason it was over boosting a little bit, so I'll have to look into that. Maybe I just don't have my vacuum line tight enough on my wastegate.